Former President Nelson Mandela has long enjoyed respect both in the country of his birth and internationally. Many saw him as an almost godlike figure of hope and faith in the post-apartheid South African nation-building project. But after more than 2 decades of democracy and 4 years since his death, some critics argue that poverty, inequality and racial tension cast doubt on Madiba's legacy. I have 4 backchatters in studio to unpack the youth's views on Madiba's legacy. And I'll start with Tato. With more than 20 years of democracy, should we still be celebrating Madiba as an icon?
Yeah, I think definitely we should be still celebrating him as an icon. One, because I think, you know, as the man who was part of the group that intensified the struggle against apartheid, right, that made sure that, you know, there's no domination of any sort of racial group by any other, right? So that's something we should celebrate, right? And now in democracy, the opportunity to deal with issues as social issues and not just an issue of an evil dominant group over a bad dominant group. We can now deal with issues as they come, you know. So I think that's something to celebrate. The activism is something to celebrate. The move to a democratic society is something to celebrate, and that's part of the legacy. So yeah.
Fasi, I mean, we have quite a lot of young people coming out and saying there is nothing to celebrate, as Tato believes, you know. Well, he believes that there is a lot to celebrate with his legacy, but there are those who are saying there isn't a lot to celebrate when it comes to that. Do you hold that view as well?
Look, I think it's easy for people to think that. I mean, the lived reality of our people is one of poverty and of suffering. I don't think we can take away from that element. But to say that nothing's changed isn't factually correct. A fair amount has changed. And when you look at it, and I think this is also what we need to take from Mandela's legacy around the political freedoms. I think there's a different debate to be had around the economic freedom and economic liberation of our people. But in terms of the political element, a great deal has changed. The fact that we don't have...
Does that really matter, considering, you know, what the realities are in societies? I mean, if you go to a township, those ills, the social ills are, you know, really, really pertinent.
The economic liberation of our people is fundamental. And we will not be truly free until we have that economic element there. You're quite right. As much as we have political rights in this constitution, you can't eat the right for freedom of expression, or you can't eat the right to freedom of protest. That's not what's going to put food on your table. And I think that's why people are in a space where, nothing's changed, nothing's changed. But I think if you look at them as sort of 2 pieces to a puzzle, you then understand that freedom is not just one element or another. It's far more nuanced than saying, oh, we have a constitution, we have a democracy, therefore we're free. We need to interrogate that a lot more deeply in order to understand why our people are saying, actually, we're a bit more disillusioned with the current democracy. We had different ideas of what it would be. And of course we did. Of course we thought that things would be better immediately. But it's only been 24 years.
Yeah, I want to bring in Mpilo. She's saying that it's only been 24 years. A lot of young people impatient and saying, you know what, let's scrap this whole celebrating Madiba thing. Let's deal with the issues that affect us as young people. What's your take on that?
So I think one of the realities we have to engage is the effect that figures of legitimacy have on how we conduct political discourse. As Fasia accurately identified, one of the most notable gains of Mandela's cohorts of freedom fighters was the political gains. However, in contemporary times, it's very ironic that those same figures are used to discredit the political sentiments of contemporary youth. So when youth today...
Tell me what you mean by that.
So when youth today want to engage these social ills that Tato speaks of, wants to take them as they come and engage them in a contemporary context, what's the first thing people cite to delegitimize you, to delegitimize your militancy, to delegitimize your impatience? Mandela wouldn't have done it like this. It's interesting that the very people that they deliver these political liberties to are the same people who are silenced by the narrative of people like Mandela because of how he chose to conduct his brand of diplomacy. Yeah,
and we saw quite a lot of that playing out during the Fees Must Fall movement as well as the protests. You know, what's your take on Fumo?
Definitely, I do agree with Mpilo. I think when we engage Mandela's legacy, we also need to engage who does the legacy belong to, or is it for? Because now he's an icon, he's a public figure. So for example, there's always been that conundrum between do maybe our white counterparts own Mandela's legacy and say, oh, that's not the rainbow nation that Mandela had envisioned, or do we maybe opt in for the more political route, saying that the ANC, this is what Mandela wants and this is what we are doing for the people, therefore we are somewhat pushing the legacy forward, you know?
Yeah.
So,
I want us to really just unpack who we are actually, celebrating as a nation. Is it Madiba, the political man, or are we looking at Madiba post, apartheid, the man who took a reconciliatory kind of stance? Tato?
I think the means of operation change given the times, right? So I think it's in the times from the 60s to the 80s, right? A revolutionary military movement is something that was happening the world over, right? And it's and was an opposition to a political sort of geopolitical situation where the liberal right was fighting ardently against anyone who was fighting for their revolution, for the liberation of their people the world over, right? So that was something that was geopolitically available to the ANC as an option, right? What happens in the 80s when that's no longer the way the world is operating, right? It's no longer available for them to be the same militant group, right? So I don't think it's anti-political to be a diplomat at all. I think it is fundamentally political, but it is within that context that we should analyze what type of tactics should be used and should not be used.
Yeah, and I think maybe I should also add on. I think, Bilo, you guys spoke about this idea of what... There's this whitewashing, I think, of what Mandela's legacy is. There's this idea of if we raise a fundamentally problematic issue, okay, no, that's not a Rainbow Nation idea. That's not what Mandela would have done. And that, for me, is the whitewashing of Mandela's legacy. As Tato rightfully said, Mandela was radical in the day. He was the person who fundamentally also lobbied for the armed struggle, for the defiance campaign. He was the person who said, no, actually, we're not doing enough. Actually, it's not enough to try and have small Inyana sort of campaigns. That's not good enough. Yeah. It was him and his counterparts, Walter Sisulu or Tambo, who said, actually, now is the time to engage in an armed struggle, and then went on to training. And people sort of conveniently forget that part of Mandela. They forget there was this fiery, this young, this militant person, and then you see that being reflected in other young people.
Is that not what people miss about Nelson Mandela? You get a lot of people saying, we wanted that firebrand to come out, and take charge as we were negotiating as a country.
Yeah. As Tato said, if you as a politician make the choice to adapt to a different political climate, you also must accept the fact that there are consequences for how people will interpret your discourse, your narrative, and the sequence of political decisions you took. Yeah. So the reason why Mandela's legacy is able to be whitewashed, whereas you can't whitewash Thomas Sankara's legacy, is because Mandela did something different. He gave us a negotiated democracy. And we can talk all day about the outputs of diplomacy versus conflict-based resolution. Yeah. But the point is, the way that he chose or the mandate he was given organizationally, as far as a negotiated democracy, now informs the framework we use when we're adjudicating any political choice. Even the land expropriation debate can't happen without South Africans thinking about white recourse. What will the whites say if we decide this? And I think those are legacies. Those are outputs of how Mandela deviated from his initially militant and...
Was it only just Madiba? Mfumo?
I just think also we need to be careful with prescribing what is the Mandela legacy, because I think we when we evaluate or when we conceptualize Mandela legacy politically, we speak about how we transitioned into democracy and how there's the sell-out culture. But then when we speak socially, when you speak in terms of Rainbow Nation, there's a different conversation that happens. I think so. Maybe perhaps we should try to list all his legacies, or maybe analyze where or what Mandela was. Because, yes, he was a radical, but at the same time, he was a person who was seeking peace for the black man, and was the same person that I'm not going to put in the amount of trauma that apartheid put onto black people. So hence maybe he opted for the other route, because everyone was saying why are we not going to war?
Yeah,
you know,
but I think even more important for us to discuss, perhaps in the second part of the show, is to really look at how we as a country celebrate or commemorate Madiba's legacy. Coming up, according to Stats SA, more than half of South Africa's population are poor. As South Africans celebrate Human Rights Month for the 24th time, many are asking whether the levels of poverty and inequality are the reason or the result of the compromises of the Mandela era. Did Mandela and those around him really sell us out, as many critics of his legacy believe? We tackle that and more when we return.